Hi, this is Peggy from War. So our guest today is Pelli Wang. Pelli, thank you so much for being with us today. You're an investor, you're an expert in blockchain, you are head of partnership at Consensus, so you have obviously a very interesting perspective on the new normal in financial services. Would you like to tell us a few words about what you're doing, your new company? You're an entrepreneur as well, and then maybe we'll get going.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you. So as Peggy mentioned, my name is Pelli Wang. I've really been, my entire career working at the intersection of finance and technology. So I spent the first, half of my career in more traditional finance, working with really big banks and private equity firms before making the jump over to the technology world, working with startups like Seed Invest, Consensus, and now my own company, DeerCreek, where we help with advisory, helping with big banks and financial institutions make the jump in digital transformation. So really glad to be here.
Thank you so much. So first question, obviously we spoke about COVID offline. There is no way we can avoid the topic. So from your perspective, what will be some of the major lasting impacts of COVID in the financial services industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a very profound and long-lasting impact. As COVID started hitting in the springtime, it was the first time in my lifetime where I had to live in a quarantine and basically do all of my daily functions online. That means working from home, communicating with family, friends, colleagues on Zoom, Hangouts, Teams, ordering groceries online. And so if you kind of look at it from that perspective, a lot of those functions have slowly over the last 5, 10 years really migrated online. But banking and payments and finance really has been like a laggard. I think a lot of people are still used to going to their bank, doing a lot of those processes, uh, paper-based, getting a loan, sending a wire, and it's not caught up to the speed at which people really want to transact now, which is in real time. I don't want to be limited by business hours. You have to get things done by 9 to 5, and then after 5 o'clock, sorry, we have to wait the next day, and then it's going to take 3 to 5 business days for that to clear. And so I think some of the digitization efforts for financial services, this year, I think a lot of banks realize that we need to catch up, in terms of really speeding up that process. So a lot of those initiatives that might have happened in 3 to 5 years have really come to the forefront. And I think in terms of how people, in the future will sort of work, there'll be more digital nomads. People are going to buy things more internationally. So all of those need to be more harmonized in terms of services. So I think that's what the new normal is going to look like. And as a customer with your, personal bank or your business bank, you're going to expect those services, and they're going to have to deliver.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the acceleration of digital adoption that we've seen in the last 10 months has probably been the equivalent of the last 5 or 7 years, in a very short period of time. So if I keep that in mind, do you see regulations and policies that will be impacted by COVID and this new way of living and new expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the areas that people have really sort of demanded to see more, faster real-time payments, is a good example of that. So, with a lot of, the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of fintechs get into, peer-to-peer payments, right? You send someone, in the US, you can use Venmo, you send money to someone and it shows up in their digital wallet. But sort of the back end of that is still quite slow. So from that experience, the infrastructure, people realize we need to really upgrade that. And I think that there's, some big initiatives on the government side. The Federal Reserve, they're working on Fed Now, which is really to provide 24/7, 365 days payments for both wholesale and retail, banking. And so those are some of the policy changes that we see. And sort of dovetailing around that, with the rise of crypto, I've been in that industry the last 3-4 years, and we've seen a lot of adoption. People really kind of gravitate towards that. They really want sort of instant payments, being able to not only, connect with people locally in their home country, but maybe I want to send, payment to a vendor in China or Singapore, and having those markets open, all, wherever you are. I think we're seeing, policy and regulators really respond to that. In fact, this year, there's been a lot more clarity from the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, being more open, saying, okay, we see this as an emerging asset class. It is, I think in many people's perspective, more legitimate. And we're going to create policies to allow banks to, custody digital assets, and make sort of the process of applying for licenses much easier.
Well, the European Central Bank actually has opened a consultation on digital euro. So that's something that, to your point, is really front and center of the regulators. And they published their digital strategy back in September. And they have a lot on what you mentioned, real-time payments, digital currency. They mention also a lot of regulations for big tech, fintech, because their idea is like, wow, same services, same risks, same rules. So we're going to see, I think, in Europe and probably in the developed world, like these harmonizations of regulations.
100%. And if you kind of look at sort of banking and the history of banking, a lot of that has been very siloed, right? So it operates, within its own country, and then you see it sort of build up. And as, again, commerce has been more global, people are kind of wanting better systems to send money between the US and the euro. And right now, a lot of those sort of systems are very, they're very archaic, and they're just like, well, we need a Band-Aid to fix a solution. And so they put that in place. And then they put more and more of these systems kind of, piecemeal together, but that's not a good system because, payments is, there's just more and more activity happening, and there's more and more volume. And we're starting to see a lot of bottlenecks where they're like, oh, we just can't clear it fast enough because the infrastructure is not really built to handle that. So that's kind of exciting to see, over the next 5-10 years, there'll be a lot of infrastructure upgrades.
Yeah, we have a lot of work happening here in Canada exactly on that real-time payments. It's been ongoing for so long that people are always waiting. Okay, well, when is that going to be released? But staying on your comment of global, obviously COVID has an impact based on the debt that sovereign government took, what people called the end of the global supply chain. What do you think the future global financial order or global financial stability is going to be post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with COVID, with it being so, it's horrible that it was so contagious, but it impacted, every country at the same time. So it was truly, a global pandemic. And we see, governments and countries really having to respond to it. Everyone has their own policies. But as a whole, there's been, kind of this central banks around the world have issued, massive amounts of stimulus. I think there was, I've read different reports, something like $15 trillion of central bank stimulus being issued this year, which is, I think, 17% of the global GDP. And of course, that's necessary, to kind of buoy businesses and individuals that were impacted. But with so much new sort of printed money moving around, we see that sort of buoy the equity markets and the bond markets, and those assets, are going to kind of be sloshing around, and people think, once sort of we get a vaccine and people can go to kind of semi-normal life, what is going to happen with asset prices, if there's going to be massive inflation, and that could happen when interest rates are at all-time lows, and sort of we've seen kind of with the cryptocurrency in the blockchain world, a lot of people say this is a good, sort of dovetail for people to enter, into decentralized monetary environment. I think that's been sort of a popular theme for millennials, younger generation, where they want, their banking system to be more portable. But those are all things happening in real time, happening, as we see, the coronavirus evolve.
Yeah, I was listening to Christine Lagarde yesterday. She was doing a keynote for the ECB forum, and it was interesting. She was saying that's a recession that is service-led, because obviously that's services that took the biggest hit, while usually recessions tend to be led by industrials and manufacturing. So she was mentioning that service-led recessions are actually way slower to recover.
Mm-hmm.
And back to the vaccine, by the time the vaccine is approved, by the time the vaccine is distributed, like there's many cycles. And she was mentioning probably over waves coming. So you're going to have a very bumpy recovery as well. So it's going to be an interesting, I think an interesting 12, 18 months still ahead of us. Unfortunately, it's not going to be, oh, there's a vaccine. Okay, we're out of the woods.
No, I think it's really changed a lot of people's, how they think about work. I think that the future of work has really, changed. And we're seeing a lot of people in the US, rethink, okay, well, long term, am I going to be able to do remote work? Maybe not every single day, but maybe there's going to be this hybrid model where I can spend some days in the office working with other people, other days I can be remote, and of course that's relevant to a lot of service-based jobs, and because of that, people rethink, okay, well, where do I want to live? Do I want to live in cities? And there's been a lot, not a lot, but there has been sort of migration out of the cities to more remote, rural, suburban places, and that will change how cities, what that will look like in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, the impact on asset prices, what would that mean in the longer term?
Mm-hmm.
Coming back, I would say, to the financial services industry, in terms of resetting competitive positioning, obviously the event we went through has been a big upheaval, which is an opportunity for challenger to come up, and sometimes for incumbents to actually solidify their positioning. Where do you think it's going, and what type of financial organization do you think is going to be benefiting from the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think companies really need to be more responsive to customer demands. So for a long time, you see legacy financial services and banks, they kind of rested on their laurels because they, have been around for so long, and banking needs to be very secure. They can't really be at the forefront of changing all the time. But we see kind of the incumbent fintech companies being more nimble, being able to offer solutions that are more pointed, that solve problems, and people kind of demand better services, from their banks. They want to use better data, open APIs where I don't want to always enter the same amount of data if you already have that. And some of that is, with regulation that was put in place so that, we don't, again, have another financial crisis like what we had 10 years ago. But we're starting to see the blurring the lines between, like, are you a finance company with better, with a better tech stack? And I think those are the companies that will really do well, in the coming years. And we're starting to see, kind of these like cross partnerships between big tech companies, like Apple, Google, and that's also another threat because they're really good at building consumer products that people love, like Gmail and social networks. And I think people are kind of like, okay, well, I use these products and they're really good, they're really stable, and they're fast. Why can't that be what my bank experience is like? And so I think, right now, yeah, like for instance, Goldman Sachs and Apple, came out with their new Apple Card. Google and Citibank are now offering online checking accounts in the US. And we'll see where kind of big tech goes. And I think that they're definitely going to move more and more into the financial services. And I think that competition will create better products for the end user.
Yeah, and so I see like you, big tech being probably the main threats, and personally, I think that the threats might also become more from a national security standpoint, in the sense that if you are in Canada, in France, or in Germany, do you want 30% of the financial services owned by a firm in the US that is actually a technology company that is very lightly regulated? Well, I'm not personally super keen on that, but we'll see how things turn out. Do you have a perspective on that before I
Yeah,
jump?
I think that's partially why we are seeing partnerships right now versus all out, new launches. So, like Facebook Libra, there was a huge backlash, and I think they went about it probably the wrong way. They kind of came at it from a tech perspective where, like, we're going to do this big launch. We're not really going to tell regulators what we're doing. And that really kind of freaked out a lot of people. And there was such a swift and strong, kind of counter punch to their announcement. And I think that really slowed down the development of where they were going to take Libra. And now they kind of renamed it to Novo, I think is the new name for that. So yes, I think they're going to have to realize in financial services, you have to play with the regulators. If you don't, they're going to just stop you. And so right now there is a collaboration, but I think once they kind of learn the ins and out of, okay, this is what we need to do, I think there is a good chance they might outright purchase a bank, or they will build one up from scratch and say, okay, we know these are the limitations, and then we're going to build a better one from the ground up.
Mhm. So looking at the incumbents, you work with a lot of banks. What are the main projects you see in terms of digital transformation that are happening right now?
So I think one of the big ones is just improving. So improving the front end. I think almost every legacy bank has a mobile app, and I think that they're trying to make the onboarding process much much better and easier. I think that's where a lot of the fintechs have done a great job, where it's a much smoother, more logical onboarding. They can ask you relevant questions. They might use it, a smarter way to verify your identity and do KYC and anti-money laundering, those things that they are complying with. I think also looking at some of the product offerings, real-time payments is a big one that a lot of executives are trying to figure out. Okay, do we want to wait 3-4 years for Fed now, or do we want to find better solutions? Because that's where people historically might not switch banks, but now the barriers to entry are much lower, and so you don't necessarily just go with the bank that you signed up with when you went to college, and they had a great sort of deal and advertisement, and you're like, oh, okay, great, I'm going to stay with them for 20 years. That might have been the case 5-10 years ago, but now I think people, they're getting advertisements online, they can open bank accounts online, it's much lower barrier to entry, and so someone might have 2 or 3 different bank accounts. Again, offering products that people really demand, and I think those are sort of the 2 areas that we see a lot of improvements.
Yeah, and I've seen the same thing you're mentioning, because now people are looking at, oh well, with Revolut, if I travel, I can use that functionality. I have maybe a traditional bank for my mortgage, then I'm using a neobank for just my maybe investments and Robinhood and things like that. So I agree with you. There is a different mindset than maybe the generation of like Gen X boomer, of I have one institution, maybe I have 1 or 2 credit cards from, I don't know, my shopping, grocery store, whatever, but still extremely concentrated. So that's going to be interesting to see how that will be rebundled actually.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of what some of the fintech companies, the neobanks, what they've done well is they find a feature that people really want. So, for instance, Chime is a big player in the U.S., and they found out that for people that needed liquidity quickly, right? So if you get paid every 2 weeks from your company, the way that sort of the ACH program is set up, they can, the company would move their, let's say you get paid on Friday, they would move money into the company's bank account on Wednesday, and then they would, send it because of how long the clearing and settlement takes. And so they could tap into that. They can ping, say, okay, this person will get paid $1,000, for instance, on Friday. We will advance, it 2 days early. And that feature was really, really popular for a lot of people that needed, needed the funds earlier to pay for bills, etc. And because of that feature, they were able to get a lot of new customers. And then from there, that's kind of unbundling some of the features. And then, once they kind of start building that loyalty, they can offer other products to them and then rebundle some of those services once they have, a reconstituted base of customers. We're seeing that, as a strategy that wins for a lot of fintechs. And, it's not easy in this space because it is very competitive, and, there are high costs for compliance and running your infrastructure.
Yeah, the B2C, I'm more an enterprise software B2B person in the financial services space. I always look at B2C as such a huge, CAC. And in Canada, it's even worse, I would say, because the market is so small. So you need to build the same infrastructure for a very, very small market. But it's really interesting to see, as you mentioned, you start with your land and expand. With really something that attracts people. At the end of the day, how are you going to be able in 5-10 years to keep that edge when everyone seems to be merging in the same direction and doing more or less the same thing? That's going to be interesting. Last but not least, so what have you done in the last 10 months? So what has been the big transformation for you over COVID? Did you start yoga, cooking, no traveling, obviously, there is no commute, or did you reallocate your time, and what growth did you see in the last year or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been uh, time has really flown by. There are days where it feels very long, and then months that feel like it's gone by really quickly. I think in terms of reimagining work from home and sort of thinking about what that impact will look like over the next few years, thinking about as we build sort of DeerCreek in our business, a lot of the things that we used to really do a lot, go to conferences, meet people in person. We've now replaced that with a lot of online meetings. And that's actually been fairly efficient, not having to travel. And so thinking about long-term how that will impact our business has been really an exciting sort of exercise. And just, we've been really busy because what we do specifically with digital transformation, helping financial service companies rethink their business model for the next, few years, how to incorporate Bitcoin or crypto. So we've been really busy doing that, and we're excited to see sort of the golden age, of finance really come to play over the next decade.
That's great. So no Zoom burnout yet. I have to admit that I need to limit myself to 4 hours a day. Otherwise, I just feel overwhelmed. Are you still hanging on there?
Yeah, I think trying to take a little bit of time to, get some exercise if you're able to just, go for a walk, get, do some yoga. Meditation has been a really important aspect of my day. So just even taking 5 minutes or 10 minutes to jot down, kind of how you're feeling, keeping your mental health, kind of up, I think is really important. And trying to surround yourself with, close friends and family. So I think that's how we're going to get through
Yes.
this time. And yeah.
I think the meditation, yoga, I'm in the same bandwagon, and it has definitely helped me. I think go through that very uncertain time with I would say minimum damage, at least so far. But it was wonderful to have you, Pelli. Thank you for taking the time. I know it's an extremely busy time for you, and thank you for sharing your insight. It was very, very good.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, Pelli. Bye.